Good morning, everyone. I noticed some folks already started writing in chat, putting their name in there. Welcome, everyone. We are going to start because we have 2 hours of information, and I'm going to say a little bit about how we're going to do this. So my name is Connie Silva. Again, I'm Director of SPP-TAP project, and as you all know, the session is brought to you with funding from the California Department of Education, and we're here to help support your development of your CCEIS plan, your Comprehensive Coordinated Early Intervening CCEIS plan. So what we're going to do today, you've heard from the music, if you heard that coming in, we're doing a little bit of Jeopardy. So you had homework, as you know, there were 4 videos that were sent to you, and we're hoping that you were able to view them all prior to this. And this Jeopardy is going to be a way of us to interactively touch on some of the key points that we hope you learned from those video sessions. And not to worry if you weren't able to watch them all. I would definitely recommend that you go ahead and watch them. That's important information there, and what we're going to touch on today with our Jeopardy questions are only some of the highlights. And actually the questions were developed by what we call sort of our frequently asked questions. So questions that were asked by real districts this year or in past years that we commonly hear. And again, the information was provided in the videos, but if you weren't able to watch them prior to this, there's certainly more that you should have gathered from those. So again, don't wait to view them as soon as you can if you haven't already. But what we're going to do is we're going to give you again an opportunity to test some of the knowledge that you gained through those videos. Before we start that, I just want to remind you, one of the other ways that you can get support and some of your questions answered that are more specific to you and your district, what's going on in your district, is we have our office hours, and you should have gotten an invitation for those. We have 4 different sessions in June. They really are office hours. They're 1-hour blocks of time during the lunch hour where we will have TA facilitators or SPP-TAP staff available on certain topics. So for instance, if after today you realize, wow, I have some more specific things I want to ask about my district around fiscal issues, you drop into the office hour on fiscal issues. And so those are sessions that you need to register for. Jen just put them in chat for us. So there's June 15th, June 17th, June 22nd, and June 24th. And the information is also on our website if you need to register for that. Okay. So today, what we're going to do is the first hour or so is our Jeopardy game, and then the next hour will be your team time. So I know folks registered as teams, and we have hopefully your team members are here with you. So during the last part of this session, you're actually going to go into a breakout room with your team and have time to do some work on CCEIS, and that might be related to what you learned today in terms of new learnings and new things you want to talk about. And it might just be continuing where you were prior and actually having the support of FMTA consultant or an SPP-TAP TA facilitator to have some question and conversation, again, specific to your district. It is not a facilitated time, so it is your time to use as makes the most sense for the team members that are able to participate today. Okay. So, but you'll hear a little bit more about that once we get into the team time. But first, we're going to start with Jeopardy. And before we do that, our answers to the Jeopardy questions, we want to remind you that this is not legal guidance. We do our best to interpret IDA regulations. But again, it's guidance to help you, but your specific situation is going to determine sort of what's the right thing to do in each situation. And I'll give you a little hint on the questions. You're going to have polls, and sometimes you'll get this, yes, no answer, or it depends, something like that. If the it depends is only tied to root causes. In other words, whatever you do, however you spend your money, whatever you do with CCEIS, it needs to tie to your root causes, right? To the factors you discovered on your data, from your data, are contributing to your disproportionality. If that's the only item that will determine whether the answer is yes or no, you don't have to say it depends. So just a hint, we encourage you, you're going to see the Jeopardy board in a minute. I believe there's a total of 6,000 points that could be collected if you got all the questions right. So we're going to encourage you to keep track of how you do on your questions. Anyway, Susan's going to give you more information about how we're actually going to play. But again, this isn't strictly a competition, but we know some of you are competitive. So it's just good to know how you're doing. It'll be fun. Or we certainly hope it will be fun for you. Okay, so there's the Jeopardy board. Susan, you want to say a little bit more about how we're doing this?
Yeah, so you're going to play this as individuals, and as Connie mentioned, you can go ahead and keep your own score to see how well you did and competing against yourselves. The way that we're going to do this for the asking of the information that people want to see, whether it's target population for 100 or potpourri for 500, is we're going to ask Jen. Jen is going to be calling on folks. So what we want to know is if you would be willing to just select the category and the amount. So if you're interested in doing that, go ahead and raise your hand electronically, and she will call on you throughout the Jeopardy game. She will ask you to open your mic and select the topic and the amount. You don't have to worry about answering the question. Everybody's going to do that in a different way. When the question is asked, there'll be a moment where a poll will pop up with the question and the options for the answers, and everyone will answer. Then we will share the results, show you the answer, and Connie then will expand upon the answer to give a little bit more of the nuance and the rationale behind things. Jenna will read each of the questions as they pop up, and then you'll have about 16 seconds after that for the poll to launch and for you to answer the question. So it's pretty fast paced. Do keep the Zoom window in front of all your other windows on your computer so that you can join. And if for some reason you lose your window, you might be able to press F3 to see all of the windows that you have open, and then select the Zoom window to bring it to the front. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Jen, do we have some people who've raised their hands as willing participants?
Yes, we have some wonderfully brave people to start out. I really appreciate that. Let's go ahead and start with Courtney.
Are you speaking to me?
Yes.
Oh, excellent. Hello.
Hello. Which category would you like to choose?
Let's try target population.
For 100?
You know, I'm feeling froggy. Let's jump. I'll do 300.
Ooh, nice. Can the targeted group be all at one school site?
Oh, is this like for a district?
Yeah, so you don't have to answer it. Everybody can kind of give some answers to the poll. There you go.
All right, let's see what folks have said. So everybody who answered this question, 54% of you said yes, a target population can be at one school. Let's see what the answer is. And the answer is yes. So Connie, do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, so good thing most of the people got the answer right. So yes, you absolutely can use one school site for where your target population of students that you're going to serve are. However, you want to be careful to make sure that the school that you selected is selected based on data. So it needs to be a school that definitely your data shows that's where, for instance, if you were over-identified or if discipline is the issue, that's where the issue is predominantly happening. So you want to make sure that your data is showing that that's the case. Another reason why you might select a specific school site is you want to make sure your target population is primarily composed of those students the same race and ethnicity that you were identified for. So your data might show you that the majority of, let's just say, your white students are in one particular school, and therefore that would be a way to be predominantly serving white students. So again, just making sure the data supports your school site selection. And then of course you're adding extra criteria, right? It wouldn't be all students at that particular school site, but you could limit it to the school site.
Okay. Let's get our next question.
Fantastic. Thanks, Courtney. Next up, we have Lisa Harrington.
Good morning. I would like potpourri, I'm assuming that's what that is, for 200.
Okay, does this image reflect and criteria or criteria for the target population?
So folks, I'm having a little bit of technical difficulty, so go ahead and put it in chat. Not sure why, but I will try to get it fixed. We're hearing lots of ands. I'm seeing lots of ands, Connie.
Yeah. Oh, people watch the video. Okay.
You're correct. It is and. So take us away, Connie.
Okay, so yeah, it sounds like folks really understood this. So each one of those circles, and I know this image is really hard to see because it's small probably on your screen, but each one of those circles is one of the criterias that the school, the district has decided upon. So, you know, starting with they have the D or F grades in English and math. Another one is for absences. The larger blue one, the starting is 6th through 12th grades. And then they also have taking a look at disciplinary referrals or suspensions. So a certain number of disciplinary referrals or suspensions. And the reason it's an and is the only way that a student is actually part of the target population in this image is if they fit into that small little triangle in the middle, which means they fit into every single one of those criteria, right? And if they had used an or, it would be a slightly larger group of students. So using and or making sure you have and is certainly one of the ways to really hone in and make a smaller number of students that you're serving, but that's not necessarily what you have to do. But good job, everyone.
All right.
Thank you. Next up, we have Kelly. Mavis? Yeah.
All right. I would like to choose target population for 500.
Ooh, we're going big. Can all 9th grade students be a targeted group?
I'll give another second or two because we had a little glitch. Seems like our poll is taking a little time to respond. And I'm going to go ahead and shut it off now. And let's see if I can share it. Connie, I'm going to tell you what the results are because it's still showing up on my screen as that's still going. There we go. Okay, let's try this. Everybody said that, or not everybody, but the majority of people said no, that all 9th grade students can be a targeted population, and they are correct.
Right. Good job. Yeah, so the main reason for this is that, again, IDA requires that the targeted population is the group of students that would have challenges, need additional supports and interventions in order to be successful in the general education environment. And so obviously not all 9th graders fit that criteria, right? So no matter what you decide what the criteria is in terms of who is challenged and needing additional supports, it's certainly not going to be all 9th graders. So that's the main reason. You need more criteria than that. Although you could limit it to 9th graders and then layer criteria on top of that.
Okay. We'll see if the poll goes away, but in the meantime, I'm going to move on to the next.
Okay, Maricela Harvin, I think you're next.
Okay, I want allowable activities for 300, please.
Can we use CCEIS funds to buy software and other curriculum materials for a K-3 reading program?
The poll's on its way. Again, I'll give you another moment or two since we had a little technical glitch. I'm going to try and get those polls popping up a little bit quicker next time. All right, I am seeing that the majority of people Connie, I'm just going to tell you what I see because I don't want to have a problem with the poll sticking. So what I'm seeing is that, oh gosh, it's almost neck and neck between yes and it depends. So the answer is it depends. And why is that?
Oh, so that's good. So a lot of you did get that. So there's a couple issues with strictly buying software for and other curriculum materials for K through 3 reading program. I don't have enough information to say yes or no, so that's why it depends. One would be, is this reading program focused to support your target population? If it's for all K through 3rd graders, then that's not specific to your target population. And so at the very least, you would end up having to do some kind of blended funding, right? Because it's not just for those students. And then, of course, it's always, again, is it tied to the root cause? But the other thing is, if it's a standard curriculum or software for a reading program, how is this different from what you are already obligated to do for your students, right? So that's the main thing, is like, how is this particular curriculum, one, is it new? And two, is it aligned to your root causes and your target population? So without knowing more about, you know, again, are you just buying more books and more materials for your K through 3rd grade? If that were the case, it would need to be a no. But if you've some way aligned it to particularly provide interventions to your target populations that happen to be in those grades, then it could be a yes.
All right, thank you.
Great. We have about 3 people lined up for volunteers now. So if anybody else would like to volunteer to get in line, you can do so now. Next up, we have Jamie Lambert.
Hi, I'm so sorry. I couldn't unmute for some reason.
No worries.
I would like potpourri for 500, please.
Okay.
Must LEAs track students who receive CCEIS?
All right, well, it seems like our poll is stuck, so let's see what the answer is. Actually, I'm seeing almost everybody is saying yes, and they're correct. Connie.
Yeah, so this, I think the answer to this one, I don't think was difficult. I'm glad that people all understood that the answer is yes. I think the actual difficulty is in doing it, right? But remembering that you do have to track the students that receive CCEIS is part of the reason you want to be clear that your definition of your target population is clear enough that you know what students you are tracking. Right, so you're actually tracking individual students, not just this certain group. And so you would know whether or not those students at a later point within a 2-year period end up being a student with a disability. That's the main thing that at the federal level that you're needing to track. If your students actually leave your district, either because they graduate or they're just moving on to a different district out of your district, you don't have to continue tracking them. But it is a 2-year requirement after they've received a service that you continue to track those students and whether or not they end up being students with a disability.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Next up, we have Julie. What category would you like to choose?
Good morning, everyone. Let's do allowable activities for 400.
Can we use CCEIS funds for professional development on MTSS Tier 1 and Tier 2 processes?
Okay, let's see if we could share those results with you. Yes, I can this time. So Connie, it's pretty neck and neck. And so let's find out what the real answer is. It depends. And why is that?
So yeah, this is one where there's too many other things, information that's missing in order to really just be able to say yes. So there are times when it would be a yes, there's times when it would be a no.
What's the dollar amount you want for fiscal? Oh.
Thanks. Yeah. So there we go.
Madera, I think you unmuted yourself.
So some of the things to consider in this, tier 1 and tier 2 interventions, one, are they new or enhanced in some manner? So again, the interventions are for your target population. Tier 1 also is generally a universal support. So it's for all students, not necessarily just for your targeted student population. So that's going to be the trickier one. If you're trying to improve fidelity and you actually are providing some additional supports to tier 1 that you think will help support your targeted population, that's a possibility, but then you probably are going to have to do some kind of blended funding. Tier 2 interventions, those are easier in terms of, that you might end up be able to cover those completely with CCEIS funds. But again, it's going to have to be a tier 2 intervention that is new and specific to your targeted population, not so broad that, that it doesn't align with the factors that are contributing to your disproportionality. So that's, again, it's not necessarily a no, but without more information, I don't think it's one that we can just say, yes, you can do that.
Okay, it looks like our next contestant is Jillian Layton.
Hi, let's do target population for 400.
Can white students with 3 or more office referrals be a targeted group?
We're kind of running neck and neck again, Connie. It looks like the yeses are slightly ahead. Let's see what the answer is. The answer is no. Why is that?
Yeah, so this, I think people might have been a little tricked by this. And maybe we gave a couple, it depends answers. This is a very clear no. And the reason for that is because it specifically says, can white students, right? So you can never limit your criteria for your target population to just one racial or ethnic group. Even if you are identified for white students, and maybe this is a disciplinary issue, something tied to behavior, you might have 3 or more office referrals be one of your criteria, but you would never limit it to white students. And the reason that's kind of tricky is I know if you were identified for white students, you're going to want to make sure that your students that fall into your target group are predominantly white students, but it's never going to be exclusively white, right? That's in IDA. It cannot be exclusive to one race or ethnicity. So that's the problem with the way this question was phrased. If they didn't have white in there, that we could have said yes.
Thanks, Connie.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Next up, we have Madera Mariposa Selpa. Which category would you like to choose?
We would like fiscal for 300, please.
Can indirect costs be included in CCEIS budgets?
All right, we have a very clear yes answer. The majority of people think it's yes, and they are correct.
Well, that's great. Yeah, it is absolutely yes. So you need to make sure that you are using the same rate that is approved. So it's the same rate that you have for other grants approved by CDE. And then the same rules apply in terms of what IDC can be applied to or not applied to. So as you know, with other funds, if you have subcontracts, for instance, over 25,000 for any one vendor, anything over 25,000 cannot have the IDC applied to it. So again, same rules apply, and just make sure that your business office is aware of that in terms of the IDC rates that are allowed.
Great. Thanks, Connie. It looks like we're going to need a few more volunteers coming up. I would really not want to call on people. So if you would like to volunteer, I'd really appreciate that. We have Marisela again up here.
Hi, I will take fiscal for 400, please.
What percent of the Part B funds is set aside for CCEIS?
Wow, Connie, I thought we were going to trick people with this, but actually they did really well. As you can see, majority of people think it's exactly 15%, and that's correct.
That is correct. That's great. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, again, the reason why sometimes folks get confused about this is because you do have to create your budget based on an estimate, based on 15% of last year's Part B funds. But once you actually know what your 21-22 Part B fund allocation is, you will revise your budget to ensure that it is exactly 15% of the 21-22 Part B funds. Okay. Good job.
Okay, Jose, you're up next.
Let's try fiscal for 500.
500, going big. When must our CCEIS budget for the 21-22 fiscal year be expended?
Right. We've got some smart cookies in this group. And the answer that is most popular is September 30th, 2023, and that is correct.
Yes. Yeah, this was definitely not meant to be a trick question, so I'm glad most people got it correct. It is, you have, again, 27 months period, so starting July 1 of this 2021 is the beginning date. You have until September 30th of 2023, and that's part of the reason why you can sometimes, if you're identified more than 1 year, have overlapping budgets, right? Because you'll have a new budget that would start before this one is fully expended. Now, the other tricky part about that is that you can't begin spending the majority of that money until after that plan is approved. So it is a 27-month period, but the majority of those funds, certainly for implementation, wouldn't start until after probably about January of 2022.
All right, Jack, you're up next. Which category would you like?
I'm going to go potpourri for 100.
Okay. What does this image suggest is important to a well-developed CCEIS plan?
Wow. Everybody got this right. I thought we might trick you a little bit on this one, but it is important to connect the dots when writing your CCEIS plan. Connie, do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, it again just really shows that people paid attention to the videos. Yeah, and you can see the image really does just show that you know what you're doing is you're trying to address the factors that are contributing to your significant disproportionality with your CCEIS activities, and so that obviously means connecting your root causes to your measurable outcomes, ensuring that you're touching the right target student population, and then have the right activities to get to those measurable outcomes. So all of those dots need to be connected. And so when we're talking about what's allowable, things may be allowable, but if you haven't done a good job of showing how all of those things connect back to your root causes and what's actually happening in your district, you might have an allowable activity that doesn't get approved because you didn't connect the dots, right?
And we have a couple of comments in chat about you have to have heart too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Julie, you're up next. What category would you like to choose?
Target population 200, please.
Okay. Can K-5 special education teachers be a target population?
And Connie, everybody did their homework.
That's
Ah,
great.
the answer is no. And why is that?
Yeah, I'm really glad to see people definitely got that one. Yeah, your target population is always going to be a group of students. So even though you might be training teachers, you might even be training special education teachers, that doesn't mean that they're the target population. So they can be the focus of some professional development, but the target population is always going to be a group of students. And I also would say that even if you were training special education teachers, it's not likely to be that specific that it's only special education teachers, although they could be included in the professional development.
Thank you.
Okay, it looks like we have about 8 questions left, and I have 2 volunteers. So if anybody else would like to volunteer, thank you. Next up, we have Lisa. Which category would you like to choose?
I'm going to go with allowable costs for 200.
Can we use CCEIS funds to pay for behavioral assessment, like functional behavior analysis, for a general education student?
This one was a little more evenly divided between all 3 of them. Yes, no, and it depends. But the main answer is no. Let's see if that's correct. Oh, it depends is the answer. Why is that, Connie?
Yeah, this is a tricky one, so I'm not surprised that the answers are a little scattered. So in general, using CCEIS funds for behavioral assessments in the general education is an allowable activity. What gets tricky with this is that we know that because of the contributing factors, in many LEAs, the contributing factor is actually that those assessments are not done with fidelity, meaning the SST process really doesn't have those levels of intervention, so that sometimes what we call a behavioral assessment is actually a referral for special education. So if that's the case in a district where in fact there isn't assessments that happen for other purposes with other interventions that might be given, but they end up only being, does this child qualify or not for special education services? That's not truly a general education assessment, and so that would not be okay. And the other thing that's really important here is that you might be doing these assessments for any given reason. You do need to make sure that any assessment that you're given is to a student that falls into your targeted population. So if you have some new intervention that you're putting in place to support behavior, and you're going to be assessing students, on a regular basis to see how things are going, you still would only be providing CCEIS funds to cover those assessments for the students that are in your target population. So there's a little bit more, if somebody asks this question, I just want more information to make sure that they are in fact allowed to use those funds. And there might be, again, just some more details that you'd want to discuss in order to know whether or not that was a yes. But it is possible.
Great, thank you.
Okay, next up we have Heather. Which category would you like?
Can I do potpourri for 300, please?
We want to train all our psychologists in new processes for evaluating students for ED. Can we use CCEIS funds for this?
Well, Connie, the numbers bounced around quite a bit, and we ended up with having neck and neck between yes and no, and a little bit of it depends. Let's see what the answer is. The answer is absolutely not. And why is that?
Yeah. So again, we're not trying to trick people. These are, as I said early on, real questions from districts. And so it is a tricky situation. The reason is You might discover when you do your root cause analysis that in fact, one of the contributing factors is that staff do need additional information, additional professional development around the accurate or the correct or the most appropriate processes for evaluating students for ED. So that in fact could be a root cause, right? However, training, professional development around a special ed identification is a special ed function, and also a function that you're already required to do. So that would be, both a level of supplanting and also a service to special education, which is really not what CCEIS funds are for. We've got to remember, I know we say CCEIS a lot, but it's comprehensive, coordinated, early intervening services. So predominantly prior to identification. So that's the problem with the way that this question is funded now, is voiced, I should say, is worded. It is possible that you can provide supports to staff around this issue, but when you do that, it would need to be, again, in the pre-referral interventions and supports of information. So the way it is phrased, I would definitely say no. But if I talked with a district more specifically in terms of what they were trying to get to, there might be a piece of it that we could figure out how to support. However, if it's just training, the other question here is, there would be more wiggle room if all of your psychologists are not funded with special education funds 100%. So there's two issues, right? It's who you're training, and it is also what you're training on. You're training on eligibility. That's not okay. And you're training people that are typically paid for with special education funds. So those two things make it a no. It doesn't mean, again, that we couldn't, in specific situations, help figure out how to support that root cause. And again, that doesn't mean that you wouldn't want to do this, because you may have, as I said, discovered it's a contributing factor. So you just have to have other funds pay for that activity.
We have a question from Ron in chat. How about if you're funding a behavioral specialist for 20 days and you want to increase to 30 days?
That is a really good question. So my assumption is you want to increase it to 30 days because you want 10 days that they can support your target population around some particular initiative, some intervention that's part of your CCEIS plans. If that's the case, then that would be allowable. And what you would need to do is have some documentation for the reason for the increasing, right? Where they're now going to have 30 hours because I want 10 hours with this group of students doing this thing, right? You'd want to get specific so that it's very clear what those duties are and the reason you're increasing their time. You're not just adding hours. And again, hours that are specific to your target population.
Okay, thank you.
All right, next up we have Maureen. Which category would you like, Maureen?
Let's go with allowable activities for 500.
Oh, that's a big one. Can we use CCEIS funds to fund existing staff positions?
Okay, well, it looks like most people think that the answer is no, and they would be correct.
Yeah, good job. Again, real questions. So I know there are districts that are wondering about how to do this. Can we do this? And I will say that it's no, but our answers are predominantly for newly identified LEAs, right? So it's possible if you were identified second or third year, you already have some positions that are funded with CCEIS funds. You're looking at the same areas of work and you're continuing to have them do those activities. What you have to be careful if you're doing something like that, and I know the majority of you are new districts, so this really isn't the case for you, but you want to be thinking about this in the future, because again, you're thinking about sustainability, right? If you have a position funded with CCEIS, you're expecting this to help address your disproportionality. You don't want that support to go away, right? Or not completely. So you're thinking about other funding sources already if you're funding positions with this. But one of the things you want to be very cautious about, even if you're thinking about sustaining this with future funding, CCEIS funding, you might have gaps in funding. So right now your plan is due on September 30th. you're likely to have approval, a few months after that, might be sooner, but to be safe, you probably are going to assume that you don't actually have those funds for staffing positions until January. So even if you were to say that you're changing position, not positions, but staff responsibilities. So you might have existing staff, you want to change their duties so that they will be actually supporting CCEIS activities. That's possible, right? So you could have existing staff that you end up funding with CCEIS, but not until after your plan is approved, right? So it's kind of similar to Ron's question. He has an existing behavioral specialist. He's going to add some hours and have them do some work tied to CCEIS, but those additional duties can't happen until after the plan is approved, right? So anyway, I hopefully I explained why that's a no, but it could be a slightly different answer if you were continuing a previous plan. So you have CCEIS funds that are continuing from a previous year.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Madeira Mariposa Selva again. Which one would you like to choose?
We would like fiscal for 200, please.
Okay. We are making plans for next year and we are anticipating a new position, an MTSS coordinator. Can we use CCEIS funds for this position?
Well, it depends is the majority answer, and that is the correct answer.
Yeah. So again, I know that this can be, I think, something that districts want to do, particularly if they're going to be doing some kind of MTSS work as part of their CCEIS plan. Well, again, you want to be careful about when the funds will actually be available. So even though that might be your plans, you want to make sure that you're not actually expending those funds prior to when they're approved, because CCEIS funds are not retroactive. So you can't say, oh, we got approved in January, but we're going back and billing through July. You can't do that, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is MTSS coordinator, to me, is a very general, like, what is that coordinator doing? MTSS, again, is about tiered systems, including, as we talked earlier, the tier 1, universal. So there may have a portion of that MTSS coordinator covered, meaning that the portion of their duties that are actually tied to CCEIS activities. That's a possibility. Or you may, if you're a large district and you have multiple people doing different things around MTSS, and this one person is specific to those interventions that are for your targeted population, you might be able to fund the whole position. But in order to know really what's an appropriate way to cover this position and you really have to look at what they're doing. How is their time used? And if that time is specific to the CCEIS activities, and of course, always, as we say, tied to the root causes, all of that. But that's probably what you're going to want to show, is that the role and responsibilities are specific to CCEIS and therefore could be paid. And again, it might only be a portion of a position as opposed to a full position.
Great, thank you.
All right, we're down to the last 4 questions. Linda, you're up. What category would you like to choose?
I'd like allowable activities for 100.
We have a mentoring program targeting African-American boys. It is effective, and we would like to use CCEIS funds to expand the program. Is this okay?
Our answer that is most predominant is it depends, and that's correct.
Yeah, good job. Okay. Yeah, it's a really great question. And again, it's a real question. And the reason it depends, and people probably caught on to this, is what do you mean by expand the program, right? So we've already said that you cannot have CCEIS activities that are specific. Your target population cannot be of a specific or exclusive race or ethnicity, right? So this one says it's a mentoring program for African American boys. So that's a problem if you're just saying, oh, well, now we're going to put this program in a different school where we think our data, shows that we need some supports. It still is, it looks as though it's exclusive to African Americans, so that would not be allowed. But if you're going to expand it in a way that you're going to open it up to more students, so now you've decided the criteria for your target population, and anyone who fits that criteria is going to be allowed into this program, that it's a mentoring program based on what worked with your African American students, that could certainly be possible, right? Again, it's who are you serving, and in that expansion, are you ensuring that it is not limited to any one target population? The other thing is it's only for boys, which I don't think is problematic, except that, again, you want to make sure that your data is showing that there is a gender differentiation in terms of your disproportionality. So you could make it still a mentoring program that is exclusive to males, but then again, you'd want the data to support that, and you'd also want to make sure that you're not being exclusive to one race or ethnicity.
Okay, thank you. We're getting to the end here. We've got 3
Yeah.
left.
Good job.
Next up, we have Laura Savage.
Hi, I'm going to take target population for 100.
Great. Can a target population consist primarily of students with disabilities?
All right. Well, it's pretty clear that folks feel like the answer is no, and it is yes. So Connie, why is that?
Well, I understand why people think that it's a no, because the answer is yes, it is actually something that is possible, right? So can they? Yes, it can. However, it is rare. So in the majority of cases, for the majority of LEAs, the answer would be no. But in this case, it was just asking, can they? Well, so here's the reason why most of the time it wouldn't work. It's rarely justified by the root cause, right? So if districts, again, in California, most of our districts are identified based on over-identification of a certain race or ethnicity for a disability. In that case, the work that you're going to want to do, again, is the coordinated early intervening services, so prior to identification. And so they would not be students with IEPs. And for most LEAs, your target population is going to be, if not 100%, very close to 100% general education students. Okay, where it would be allowed is if an LEA, for instance, is over-identified for separate schools, or for too much time outside of the general education, that greater than 40% outside of the general education environment, where you're actually working towards getting students with IEPs back into the general education setting. In that case, your services are predominantly going to be to students that already have IEPs, right? They're students with disabilities, and you're trying to get them back into the general education environment. In that case, they could never be exclusively students with IEPs, but they could be primarily students with IEPs. But that's a rare circumstance. We don't see that a lot, in California in particular. So while the answer is yes, it probably is no for your LEA. Okay.
Oh, it's so tricky, some of these, so many nuances. All right, we've got 2 left. Who's next?
All right. Our last person to choose a category will be Dr. Havania Hayes-White.
Can I select potpourri for 400?
All right. What does the policies, practices, and procedures review include?
I'm going to give you another couple of seconds because there's a lot to read on this one and digest. And our numbers are slowing down, so let me end the poll and show the results. Folks think that it is all of the above, and they are correct.
Good job. Now that's important. Yeah, so the review of policies, practice, and procedures for districts that are significantly disproportionate does need to happen annually, right? It happens every year. It also needs to you need to make sure that when you're reviewing, you're not reviewing for compliance, you're reviewing for any factors that are contributing to your disproportionality. And then that's what you're actually addressing. So you're going to change policies and practice and procedures, whatever is needed to address those factors. And then you're going to publicly report anything that you've changed. So all three of those are required under IDEA. So good job, everybody.
Right,
Okay.
last one is fiscal
Lazar.
for 100.
What can we spend money on prior to our CCEIS plan approval?
I'm going to give you a little bit more time since the poll decided to get hung up there for a second. All right, see what the results are. Overwhelmingly, the answer is plan development, though there were some that said none above and some that said all of the above. So Connie.
Yeah, so prior to approval, you didn't display the answer. There you go, plan development, right? So I've said this before, but it's really important to remember. You will not have activities that are outside of the plan development for your CCEIS allowed. You won't be able to get approval for expenditures prior to approval of the plan. So, but everything that's tied to your plan development, so that includes if you need to, pay stipends for teachers or parents to be participating in your stakeholder group. If you need to be, again, hiring consultants, so the TA facilitators to support your work. If there's materials that you need in order to, again, be whatever it might be, learning about this process. So professional development might be a tiny, tiny piece of it, but it's more likely, again, very, very specific to plan development. It's not going to be something that's already to address a factor. It's just, what do we need to know in order to develop this plan, right? To get this work done. So it's important that you pay attention to that after the plan is approved. Then of course it can include those things that are allowable, which includes both professional development and any of the implementation of the activities that are approved.
Okay, that's great.
That
Ooh, and the
was
winner
last
is all
question.
of us.
Wow, so I was pretty impressed with how people did on those questions. I hope you kept track. I know once you get started, sometimes people forget to count their points, but I really think, again, if 6,000 points is possible. I don't know if folks want to, brag a little bit if you managed to get something like over 4,000, because that wasn't easy. So I hope folks did well. It looked like from the polls that you did. I also know that we had a couple questions that came in sort of late this morning, I believe, or just yesterday, that I just wanted to get to for a moment, since we have a few minutes. Somebody asked what a recommended number of measurable outcomes are, like how many are too many? And that's a really good question. It is one that I think is very specific to your LEA. So we have LEAs with budgets that are, over $1 million, and we have LEAs with budgets that are closer to, 15,000. The number of measurable outcomes you're going to be able to address will definitely be, impacted or determined in part by how much do you have in terms of funds, right? Can't do a whole lot or address too many that cost money if you have less money. So you want to certainly be cautious of that. So my expectation are those plans with fewer, with the smaller budgets are going to have fewer measurable outcomes. That's not always the case, but that's, predominantly true. It's also how many can you track, implement and track. You're going to be monitoring your progress on your outcomes. So I think on average, and folks at CDE could let me know if I'm right or wrong, but somewhere in the 3 to 5 measurable outcomes is probably doable. Beyond 5, I would really think you're probably trying to accomplish more than you can in this time period. But again, it also partly depends how related are they to one another, and do you have, again, the resources to really not just implement, but monitor those and make some decisions based on your data about what's working or not working. So that's just a general, again, talk about that with your FMTA consultant and with your stakeholder group in terms of what can actually be done. And remember that every root cause you have and everything you want to do does not have to be done, right? You do have to do probably some strategizing about what are those high leverage activities that are really going to hopefully get your outcomes that you want. Another one asked about some effective models for conducting a review. And I'm not quite sure what the review is of. So that might be a question that you want to bring to office hours, or again, as part of your team time, if you want to discuss that a little bit with your FMTA consultant or the TA facilitator that's in the room. Okay. And then there were questions about tracking students, and that is a difficult process. Again, each LEA needs to put their own process in place. And it could be as simple as an Excel chart, but again, you have to have someone who's responsible for knowing who these students are and when, in fact, they receive a service. And not necessarily like on a daily basis, but as you're doing maybe progress reports, that's part of the benefit of having progress reports. What you report to CDE quarterly is you would be at least every quarter taking a look at which of our students have received services and then actually documenting that somewhere so that you can track them for the next couple of years. So I'm going to stop now because we are at the point where we should be switching into team time. So I'm going to pass it to Susan and you can tell us what we're going to be doing next.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. That was fun. I hope you got a lot of learning as well as had some fun doing it. We certainly did. In a moment, I'm going to open up the breakout rooms. And as Connie mentioned earlier, this is your team time. It's not facilitated, but there will be supports in the room. You will have FMTA consultants. You will have probably some TA facilitators. You may have somebody from SPP-TAP or another CDE person in your room. When I open up the rooms, you'll receive a notification, and each computer seems to have a different way of receiving that notification. Sometimes it's a pop-up. Sometimes you'll see a logo or an icon that's actually 4 boxes, a grid of 4 boxes. That might be, if you're on an iPad, in the upper left corner of your hand. It may be on the toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom window on your computer. I discovered that on my PC, I have to roll over the bottom of my toolbar, my Zoom window, to find the toolbar, to even see it. So, you may have to do a little hunting, but if you don't see the icon on the toolbar, then you're going to look for the icon, which is 3 dots, and it says more. You should be able to find the breakout icon there if you don't see it anywhere else. When you find that icon, you're going to select it, and then you're going to select the option to join breakout. The breakout rooms have the first 1 or 2 words in each of the LEA names, so it should be pretty easy. And to the right, it will say join in blue next to your name, your LEA name. And when you click on that, it'll give you the option to join that room, and you just click yes. Now, SELPA directors, you can choose which breakout room you would like to visit. Some of you have multiple LEAs that you're working with. Others don't have any. So you might join an LEA that is in your area. We also have several FMTA consultants that have 2 or more LEAs that they're working with, and they're going to be rotating between the LEA rooms, the breakout rooms. So if you don't see your FMTA consultant at the beginning of the time, they may show up between 20 and 40 minutes after the start of the team time. So if they have 2 LEAs that they're working with, they're going to split their time about 30 minutes, 30 minutes. If they have 3 that they're working with, it's going to be 20, 20, 20. And so just stick around. They're going to be there. Hold your questions or note your questions down so that you can get that information from them if you have a question and the other person in the room cannot help with that. So for the FUMTAs who will be moving rooms, just repeat the process for joining breakouts that I described earlier, looking for that icon and clicking on it and going through that process. That will help you move to another room. If you cannot move yourself, you can text me and I'll get you moved. And for anybody that has problems getting into your breakout room, just stay in the main room and we will help you move to the appropriate room. Connie, is there anything else you want them to know before we head into the breakout time, the team time?
Yeah, just two quick things. One, we recognize you might need a little break. So getting to your breakout room first, and then your team can decide if you want to take a quick 5-minute break before you get to work. That's fine. And the other thing is we are scheduled to go for another hour, but we recognize you're going to be working on something. So don't worry, you're not going to be kicked out, as soon as the bell rings and it's 12 o'clock. So if you need to, another 5 minutes to finish up a conversation or an activity, feel free to do that. I think we've given at least a 10-15 minute window. So we are done at 12 o'clock. We're not regathering. So once you're done, you're done. But again, as Susan said, you can feel free to ask us questions and to ask for our support.
Great. And I do know that Brett Gillespie is having a little internet connectivity, so he'll be a little bit late to Paramount's breakout, but don't worry, he'll be there, and I will be a little late to El Monte, but we'll see most of you soon.
It looks like we just had a question pop up in the chat. I don't know if we want to address that before we break out.
Yeah.
So can I ask funding clarification? Maybe I misunderstood. Do we get money for CCEIS or do we put money aside 15%?
Yes, you put money aside, as Mildred answered. You move your 15% of your Part B fund allocation, so it's special education funds, and you move them into your CCEIS funding, which again is predominantly for general education. So yeah, that's the way that happens.